My mind is racing, and I'm not really sure where to even begin writing. I'm typing this on my phone from a 24-hour diner. Everything happened less than an hour ago. I'm just writing this as fast as I can. I guess I should just start with a bit of background about me. I've never been a religious person. I mean, I'm not atheist, but I'm not exactly a diehard believer either. My parents raised me Catholic, and I guess I've always believed. I just never really had to think about it a lot. My religion of sorts is entertainment. All sorts of entertainment. I love watching movies, TV shows, funny posts on the internet, and different YouTube videos. One of my favorite types of movies are horror movies, especially really suspenseful ones. I'll take suspense over gore any day. The one exception is the Saw franchise, which I binged over a period of 2 days. That's why it sucks that I really don't have the time to spend engaging in this sort of content as much as I'd like. That's partly why I turned to Facebook. My friends tag me in all sorts of different meme pages. I've begun to spend much of my free time on Facebook, simply because it gave me the most amount of content in the shortest amount of time. That's why I saw my friend Hernandez's invitation to join Daniel's Devotees in Christ immediately. The name immediately raised a red flag for me, an obviously religious group. What kind of group had such a strange name? The group's profile picture gave me a few answers. It appeared to be a logo, almost one you'd expect from some corporation, with two large bold D's interlocked with one another, as though they were Olympic rings. Hernandez gave no indication of what the group actually was, but he typically invites me to groups to be tongue-in-cheek. I figured this was probably the same. Curious, I joined the group with little thought. What's the worst that could happen? And made my way to the group's description. It read, official Facebook page of the DDIC, and who believe in the words of Christ as illuminated by Daniel. All are welcome, regardless of religious belief, creed, color, and political belief. We are all brothers and sisters with Daniel. We are all equal, and humor is the best way to show that. That is why we believe that in humor there is love, and in love there is divinity. Based on that description and the post I found on the page, I figured this was a meme group for some obscure denomination of Christianity. Hernandez must have invited me as some sort of joke, since he was always doing stuff like that. The memes were actually pretty funny too, and growing up in a Catholic church, I understood a lot of the references they were making. There must have been a few thousand posts in the group, despite only having around 15,000 members, pretty small for a meme group on Facebook. A lot of them have been fairly active. Hell, I even found myself commenting on some of the posts with jokes of my own. Lots of likes and lols. One comment even said, "Love this kind of stuff, brother. Blessings from Daniel." Some people even joined in on the joke. It seemed their humor was much my own, and I found myself developing some level of respect for their ability to joke about something as sacred to them as religion. As I was scrolling, a chat window popped up. It was Hernandez. "Hey man, get my invite to that group?" I typed my response. "Yeah, LOL. Why'd you invite me to it?" "Looks funny. People are pretty nice." Another message in quick succession. "You know me, not religious, but figured you would find the jokes funny since you grew up Catholic too, lol." Yeah, I guess he had a point. The group was pretty cool. I closed out of Facebook, closed my MacBook Air, and got ready for bed. I found myself visiting the group fairly frequently. Although I'm no whiz with photo editing programs, I made a couple memes that were pretty well received. Lots of laughing and ironic wow emotes were highlighted under the picture. Hernandez visited pretty frequently as well, and I always replied to his comments to mess with him a bit. They loved it. They called me their brother. I had been frequenting the group for about a month, but I hadn't really asked about their specific beliefs. I figured it might come off as disrespectful, and even though they seemed pretty relaxed about that sort of thing, I hadn't any immediate interest. That is, until I received an invitation from one of the admins for a meetup with some of the members of the group. It was described as a fun get-together with group activities. The banner looked like any other Facebook event. A clip art looking banner on top. The group list on the side was some who marked no, and some who marked yes, and maybe. The description read, "Come celebrate the annual ascension of our divinity with us. All are welcome, regardless of religious affiliation. We would love to share our beliefs and rituals with others, regardless of association. Afterwards, there will be a host of different group activities, complete with laser tag, swimming, a raffle." The list of activities went on and on. It looked, in a word, expensive. They were going to get a hotel and everything, all expenses paid. How they had that money for that, I don't know. I wasn't particularly comfortable with meeting up with people I only knew on the internet for obvious reasons. I especially wasn't comfortable meeting with people I hadn't known to celebrate in a religious ceremony, but this felt different. I felt a certain kinship with these people. I looked at those who checked yes on the invitation and found that several of the members that I had grown particularly fond of on the page were going to attend. It wasn't for another week, so I thought about just clicking maybe and deciding some later time. Meeting people from the internet felt like something I should think about first, but Hernandez didn't give me much time to think. The chat box popped up on my screen. "Yo, we should totally go to that event. It looks fun." "Yeah," I replied, "but aren't you worried about meeting strangers from the internet?" "LOL, dude, they're not exactly strangers. We've been chatting with them for a while, and they know our names anyways since we've been posting memes and commenting and shit." I thought about it for a second. Plus a free weekend getaway. That was true. It did seem like a lot of fun, and I clearly had a lot in common with these guys, and since Hernandez was going, I'd have backup if things somehow went sour. It was too perfect. I realized a lot of the users were going, many of which frequented the site. It was located maybe just an hour from where I lived, and was on one of the few days I had off work. I changed my answer from maybe to yes, and with that, I would be off to meet them. "We're here!" Hernandez roared, jolting me from my sleep. He loved to do that, just to get a rise out of me. I looked out the passenger window. We were in the parking lot. The resort was gorgeously constructed. Wooden logs define the outside of the building, moss delicately trickling down the side of the building adjacent to the parking lot. A knock on the window. It was now Hernandez who freaked. We were met with an unnervingly pearly white and somewhat blinding smile. Her blonde hair was parted perfectly to the right. It was too perfect, as though she had spent hours making sure that no detail would hint at a mistake. She sported a plain white t-shirt and a pair of white slacks. She tilted her head and her smile widened. "Hey, you two, you must be John and Hernandez. It's so great to meet you two. You made it just in time for mingling and refreshments just before the Ascension ritual. Can I get your bags?" Her voice was forcefully high-pitched and chipper. It was almost shrill. Hernandez and I looked at each other. For a moment, I wondered how she knew our names. Then I realized the obvious. We had used Facebook. Sure. Thanks." We handed her our bags and got out of the car. I felt a tad queasy and unnerved, but excited for a fun weekend away from all the stress. It was probably just from meeting new people, I thought to myself. Satisfied with that answer, we proceeded towards the resort. As we approached the beautiful bit of architecture, I picked up on the sound of roaring laughter. It was almost exaggerated, as though to ensure that there could be no mistake that it was laughter. It was almost cartoonish. I wondered if Hernandez was feeling the same way, but I felt myself being propelled forward without giving it a second thought. We walked through the front doors and found wooden round tables spread throughout an incredibly large room. Seated at each table were at least 3 people wearing the exact same clothes and the exact same smile as the woman who had greeted us out at her car. They were all laughing. I soon noticed that seated between each of them was, based on the fact that they were wearing regular clothes, a non-believer. Most of them bore uncomfortable but polite smiles. Some looked genuinely concerned, and there were some who seemed to not notice the strangeness of the situation. I didn't have time to process this much as the lights were dimmed moments later. The laughter abruptly stopped and the room became silent in an instant. Walking to the center of the stage from a hallway I hadn't known existed, as though on cue, a tall man confidently strode through a sea of tables. With each step he took, his long legs moved inside silky white slacks. He wore a white sports jacket, perfectly straightened. The jacket covered a completely white shirt, tucking in a white bow tie that had been done perfectly. I could not keep my eyes off of him. He arrived in the only illuminated part of the room, like a spotlight. "My children, for those who do not know me, I am Daniel." I know it was strange, but my first thought upon hearing this was how much sense it made. The man breathed charm. It took me a moment to realize that he wasn't using a mic. He was commanding a room by simply speaking. Every word was felt as though it was personally for you. And the slight smile he gave us when he gave us his name made me want to thank him for endowing me with such knowledge. I looked over at Hernandez. He was entranced by the larger-than-life figure that spoke before both of us. For the uninitiated, my followers call me Father. Thank you all for coming to celebrate the ascension of our divinity. Although the room was dimly lit, I could sense the full-face smiles and absolute ecstasy on the faces of his followers. I swore, over his voice, I heard the sound of rustling and scattering. Swore I heard a muffled voice. I brushed it off as someone trying not to laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. It was on this day, in the year of our Lord, 2015, that Jehovah himself bore witness to me. It was on this day, 3 years ago, that the Lord showed me the way. It was on that day that he showed me the way to salvation. Daniel spoke with a certain gusto. This was not his first time giving this speech. The lights were turned up slightly, and I heard a collective gasp as soon as the non-believers among us processed what they were looking at. 3 non-believers had been tied to a chair. There were sacks on each of their heads, where each of the muffled voices came from. I looked to my left to see if Hernandez was seeing this shit. He wasn't there, and that's when I realized something. The 3rd non-believer was wearing the same clothes as Hernandez had been wearing. It was him. The believers began to applaud and laugh this horrendous laugh. Daniel presented them as though they were the butt of some joke, miming different motions as though they were prizes on The Price is Right. He slowly walked to the non-believer seated to the very left of the 3 chairs. He tore the sack off her head, revealing a woman who must have been somewhere in her early 20s. She had a white t-shirt wrapped around her mouth, and tears were streaming down her face. Her cheeks were rosy red, and she looked confused and distraught. The laughing grew louder. Whatever this joke was to them, it had just gotten funnier. Thank you, my children, for joining me in the Ascension ceremony. We shall now bow our heads in silence and give offerings to the Lord. Offerings? Heavenly Father, please absolve each of your children of their sins. They use your creation to commit sins against your holy name. They use these lips to say blasphemies against you. He paused to untie the t-shirt that had muffled her. Before she could scream, he grabbed her lips and puckered them with his hands. There was a slight chuckle in the audience from some of the believers. And with your grace, we humbly ask that we shall absolve these sins. He pulled out a large knife from his breast pocket. The audience was laughing hysterically. As soon as she saw the knife, she began to cry and thrash violently in her seat. He raised the knife up and closed his eyes. We do this in reconciliation of our misdeeds. His hand fell. The knife pierced behind her puckering lips, severing them only halfway. Blood splattered and hit his face. He let go of her lips to wipe his face a bit, making a joke about being in the quote-unquote splash zone. The laughter was heavier, it was louder, less controlled, and it looked like some of the non-believers had joined in on it too. The girl was crying even harder, her eyes widened, tears flowing down her face and mixing with the blood. She looked down and began to thrash even more violently. Daniel grabbed what remained of her lips, forced his knife downwards again, and severed her lips completely. What followed was the most horrifying sound I have ever heard. The girl had attempted to squeak, to yell, to call for help, but with no lips. She could only make guttural noise. It was pure, unadulterated fear. I could no longer hear my own thoughts. The laughter was deafening. Daniel asked, handing her lips that he had just severed. Hey, sweetheart, you mind holding this? Thunderous laughter. These sick fucks. She looked at him through the pain, unable to respond. Her teeth were naked, facing the outside world, covered in blood and sweat. The muscles where her lips were began to move, as though she were trying to talk. Well, sweetie, if you can't hold your lips, maybe you can hold something else. He taunted her. She looked at him just as he stabbed her in the forehead. She slumped over, drool and blood slipping out of the cavity that was once her mouth. The laughter grew more boisterous. More of the non-believers began to laugh, so it grew louder. I have to get Hernandez out of here. I have to get out of here. I didn't think twice about it. I ran towards Hernandez and tried to untie him. As I was doing so, I realized the crowd had gone completely silent. No laughter. Daniel approached me. My child, what are you doing? Why do you attempt to rob God of his sacrifice? There was this aura about him. As he spoke, every word made it seem like it was okay. I noticed my hands had stopped trying to free Hernandez. I snapped out of my trance. I'm trying to get my friend out of here, you sick fucks. The last word was guttural, and spit flew out of my mouth as I said it. Daniel appeared unfazed, and simply placed one hand on my shoulder and spoke. God has a purpose for you. You are among the chosen. A purpose? For me? I looked up at him. He spoke so captivatingly I didn't even notice the blade penetrating Hernandez's throat. He gurgled, thrashed his feet around. The blood soaked the sack and splattered out. The laughter continued as Daniel turned the knife around fully, creating a hole in the throat of the sacrifice. He flung the blade out, covering me in bits of neck tissue and blood. I cried out in horror. Hernandez gasped for air and then suddenly dropped. He was gone, and I couldn't hold my rage. I was defenseless, but at this point I would rather die than not act out in pure rage. I don't really remember what I said here. My rage was blinding, and through the tears and blood I must have called him Occult, because after I had spoken, Father knelt to meet me at my eye line. You call us Occult. Why? What is the difference, my son, between us and a religion? I was covered in my friend's blood. He lay lifeless a few feet away from where I had fallen. You guys are fucking psychos, that's why you're fucking different. He laughed. No, he bellowed out laughter, as though it was the funniest joke that he had ever heard. Oh, how much you have to learn, brother in Christ and son of Adam. What do you think the Romans called Peter as he began to spread the word of God in Damascus? He asked me this rhetorically. His eyes appeared gentle, docile, loving. Was he not called crazy, a cult leader, a heathen for his love of Christ? Another rhetorical question. There is only one true difference between other religions and our own. We all have a belief system, we all worship a deity, we all have some figure with which we believe has a special connection to the deity. He pantomimed to himself to indicate he was talking about himself. The laughter grew louder for a moment before settling down, and we all operate on faith. We are not so different. So the only difference is the most obvious one. I looked into his green eyes, which suddenly filled with burning intensity.
We're the right one.
I stared at him for a second, and then looked at the heathen sandwiched between the two dead ones. Blood was everywhere. I want to go, I managed to sputter out. He looked at me sympathetically, as a father would to an incorrigible child. Then go. God will find you. You are one of his favorites, so you cannot stray far. I hesitated for a moment, then I bolted. I left the intoxicating laughter behind, running for my car before realizing that the sacrifice had my keys. I continued to run, rubbing the blood out of my eyes. I ran for about a mile before I found a nearby 24/7 diner. I walked in and I immediately went to the bathroom to wash this blood off. I slid into the booth and sat in the nearly abandoned diner, thinking about what just happened, and I was completely hopeless, and so I prayed. I haven't called the cops. In fact, I don't think I will as I write this. It's starting to look pretty funny. Hernandez being sacrificed to the greater good. Even I could appreciate the humor in that. This happened over the weekend during a hunting trip. I spent last night trying to Google and figure out what the hell I saw. I haven't found anything that doesn't seem like conspiracy craziness, so I'm open to any suggestions. A family friend has a few hundred acres in Tennessee. Once a year, my dad, uncle, me, and the guys in the family that own the land go on a week-long hunting trip. They have a cabin and a trailer tucked away at the edge of the mountain that we stay in during the week. There is no running water and we use a generator for lights during the evening. Phone service is non-existent out there. The nearest town is Murphy, Tennessee, which is about 50 minutes away by car. Typically we get out tree stands and ground blinds around 4 a.m., grab something to eat and nap, and then head back to hunt until sundown. All week my uncle and I hunted at the same quote-unquote plot. It was on the east side of the property and took about 20 minutes by four-wheeler. We would park the four-wheeler in this big clearing, and then the ground blind I was hunting from is another 15 minutes or so by foot. It's a rough 15 minutes too. I basically walk along this ridge line on the side of a mountain, and the blind is set just inside the underbrush of a tree line that overlooks the opening at the start of a river. My uncle was hunting in a blind that was a little closer walk and probably 30 minutes away from me. We hunted the same spot Sunday through Thursday. Thursday evening we were all drinking beer and hanging out by the fire. My uncle, not having seen anything all week, wanted to go to the plot that my dad was hunting. It's like a 30-minute walk from the camp, and you don't even need a four-wheeler to get there. I had killed a deer the first afternoon there, and I had seen a bunch of does that evening right before sunset, so I wanted to stay where I was. So Friday morning, after we hunted, I helped him pack up his blind and ride it out to the plot my dad had been on, and helped him set it up for that evening. I took the four-wheeler by myself that afternoon and continued hunting the same ground blind. Same thing I had done all week, everything was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary until Saturday morning. I had gone out by myself again that morning and watched a bunch of deer that had crept up right before the sun started to come up. They were a bit further than I wanted to shoot, and when they got closer to the edge of the river, they weren't big enough, or were too young for me to justify shooting. I watched them until they retreated back into the woods, and at this point it's probably 8:30 a.m. or so. The sun is fully up. Now, this is embarrassing for me, but oh well. Having spent almost an entire week packed in this trailer with two other guys and no privacy, I decided I was going to rub one out before I went back to camp. Every hunter has done it, I don't care if you've been it or not. Now I'm sitting there doing my thing, even though nobody ever walks up on you while you're hunting out there. I'm still on high alert, making sure I don't get caught by one of the guys while I'm doing this. I'm laid back in this chair inside the blind, basically one eye open, looking out in front of me, and every now and again peeking behind me through the mist to make sure no one is coming. That's when I started hearing crunching. I knew it was people footsteps, and I could tell it was more than one person. It was to my right. The mesh of the ground blind and the underbrush kept me from being able to see who it was. I calmly put my stuff away and quietly leaned up so when my uncle, or whoever it was, came up, I could act like I was just sitting there hunting. Keep in mind, we're so far out here in the sticks that it never even occurred to me that it could be anyone else out here. I listened to them walking for a while when I finally stood up and poked my head out from behind the blind and peeked over the underbrush. It was 4 people walking towards the river in a line. They were wearing these black cloak-looking things, something like Harry Potter would wear, in these furry hats that covered most of their faces. Looked like some weird cult, but the guy in the back was completely naked. He looked disgusting. His hair was curly and way too long, and he had a big beard that looked nasty, like it had a bunch of leaves and shit in it. Keep in mind, I'm already bundled up with my hand warmers in my pockets because it's like 25 to 30 degrees out. This guy had to be freezing. No shoes either. This is thick underbrush we're talking about, by the way. Rocks jutting up from the ground and shit. No sane person is out there walking barefoot, no less completely naked. This guy also had to have maybe been 115 pounds too. Just completely unhealthy looking, like these people had been keeping him prisoner or something. The sight of these guys was so unnerving to me that I was still standing there frozen in an awkward half stand and bent over position with my head out the blind, watching them before it clicked with me that I needed to stay low and sit down. At this point, they were walking past the point of the blind where I couldn't see them, and were walking with their backs towards the river. I slowly sat down, put my rifle in my lap, and watched them all step ankle deep into the river. They were facing side profile away from me towards the woods. I could see 2 of the clothed people were moving around the naked guy, and one of them was standing still holding their arm out in front of them. I got the nerve to look through my scope at them, and it looked like they were washing the guy with the river water, and the other holding their arm out, holding like a chain or something. The one holding the chain was talking, but they were way too far away for me to hear any of it. After a few minutes, the 2 doing the washing stopped, and all 3 of them held hands around the naked guy and started moving in a circle around him while he just stood there staring ahead. They did this shit for about 5 minutes at least. That doesn't seem like a long time, but a whole 5 minutes of watching whatever the hell that was seemed like a lifetime. Something of note that clicked with me last night. Whatever they were doing seemed to be timed based. My watch beeped at around 9 o'clock and nearly gave me a heart attack. No way they could hear it, but in my head I was picturing them all turning and looking at me. Right after my watch beeped, they stopped a few seconds later, so 9 on the dot. The 3 clothed people stepped back into a line in front of the naked guy, and they walked back the way they came from, exactly like they came in. None of them talked or broke the line they were walking in. It was terrifying because the way out for them was the first time I could have truly been spotted. They never saw me though, and I watched them once they passed me, head back up the mountain where I assumed they originally came from. I waited for 30 minutes or so, and I booked it out of there fast. The hike back to the four-wheeler was the most anxiety-inducing thing I had ever done. Felt like I was being watched the entire time. My head was on a swivel. My heart was beating out of my chest. When I finally got to the four-wheeler, I never let off the gas. When I told the other guys about them, the family friend said he was positive that nobody lived anywhere near the area, and that he'd try to contact another landowner to see if he had seen anything like that. Fortunately, we left the next morning. I did not hunt again Saturday evening or Sunday morning, and I thought the guys would give me shit for it, but they didn't. They could tell how spooked I was by the entire thing. First off, let me tell you that my friend and I live in a small town and only the country surrounds us. I do live closer to the city, but she lives in the middle of nowhere. One day she called me asking if I could come over since her mom was doing something for the night. I told her yes, and my dad drove me over. I noticed every single light in her house was on. I walked up to her door, and before I could knock, she opened it. She waved to my dad as he drove off. "Hurry up, come inside." She dragged me to the living room and told me to sit on the couch. She started rambling and made no sense. "You need to calm down. What's going on?" I asked. "Someone's in the back of my house, in the woods, and they flash a light every 5 minutes, and if you turn the TV off, you can hear people chanting." She started losing her breath, and I got her a glass of water. Before I could sit down again, a huge beam of light went through the window. "You saw that, right? You saw that?" I said yes and told her to turn the TV off. We listened closely, and I started to hear the chanting. It wasn't very clear, but it was along the lines of, "We want you. We want you. We want it. We want it. Come to us. Come to us." My friend was shaking at this point. I got an idea and asked if she had any binoculars. Her eyes widened and she ran to her mom's room frantically moving stuff around. Finally, she found them and handed them to me. We went upstairs, thinking maybe we could avoid the trees a bit better. We finally found a window that covered most of the woods. In the distance was a small red blob. I pointed the binoculars towards it. It was fire. Multiple people dressed in white cloaks were praying around the fire. One person caught my eyes. This person was wearing red, not white. They were standing on a stool and were watching others pray. He had something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what it was until later on. They prayed for about 5 minutes, and then one person in red lifted up the flashlight and pointed it directly towards my friend's house. Then all at once, they got up, put the fire out, and moved about 30 or more feet closer to the house. They then made a fire and started chanting once again. My friend and I started freaking out. She made the suggestion of calling the police, and I agreed. The operators obviously thought we were joking, but sent 2 police cars to check out the woods. About 20 minutes went by and the group of people were still chanting. 5 minutes after that, we heard police sirens. I pulled out my phone to try to take some pictures of the group. They were very close to this point, so I had a very clear shot. I took multiple before realizing they were panicking. They poured water over all of the fires and took off their cloaks. Underneath, they had normal clothes on. I didn't recognize any of the people, but I still took pictures of them. They all ran off deep into the woods. The police knocked on our doors, and I showed them the pictures of the people. They told me to keep the pictures and not delete them. They looked very concerned and told us that we shouldn't stay here tonight. My friend packed some things, and the police told us to get in the car and wait for them. We waited for about 10 minutes. The police said there were multiple fires. Every one of them burned out, and every one of them closer and closer to my friend's house. The police said that they hadn't seen anything like that before, and the last incident was about 33 years ago, before I was even born. They dropped us off at my dad's and told him everything. My dad researched the entire thing, and he didn't tell me anything except we're never allowed to go back to that house again. She's moving next week. If you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Please, comment your feedback. Until next time, my misfits. Toodaloo.